My name is Isabella Moore. I'm 39 years old. And the moment I realized my marriage was already over didn't come with a fight, or a confession, or even raised voices. It came with a sentence. I think I've found someone who understands me better. Daniel Hayes was 35. We had been married for 6 years and living in the same house for the last 4. My house! I had bought it long before he ever became part of my life, long before his routines blended into mine, long before I started believing we were building something permanent. On paper, our life made sense. I work as an electrical technician for a utility contractor in Washington. My days are structured, predictable. I deal with systems that either function or fail. Power lines, outages, infrastructure. There's clarity in that kind of work. Problems have causes. Solutions have outcomes. Most mornings, I leave before traffic builds. I spend the day on job sites, sometimes climbing poles, sometimes inspecting equipment, sometimes responding to emergencies that don't wait for convenience. If there's a storm, I don't come home until the lights are back on somewhere. I've always liked that kind of order. Daniel didn't. He worked as a receptionist at a small medical office. Stable hours, predictable schedule. He usually got home before I did. Most evenings, I'd walk in and find him on the couch, laptop open, phone in his hand, half watching something he wasn't really paying attention to. We didn't have children. That was always something we said we would figure out later, once things felt more settled, more stable. At least, that's what I thought we were working toward. The problems didn't start all at once. They never do. At first, it was just comments, small ones, easy to ignore if you didn't want to turn everything into a conflict. You know, most people don't build their entire life around a job like that. Or, do you ever get tired of everything being so predictable? I didn't ignore it completely. I addressed it early, calmly. I told him that constant criticism inside our own home wasn't something I was going to accept. Daniel would roll his eyes, lean back into the couch like the conversation wasn't worth finishing. You're too sensitive, Isabella. That was always his answer. Too sensitive, too structured, too predictable. At some point, those words stopped sounding like opinions and started feeling like justifications. The first real shift came about a year ago. That's when Daniel reconnected with Rachel, his ex-girlfriend. He hadn't mentioned her much before that, just a passing reference here and there when we first started dating. Someone from his past that didn't work out. Nothing significant. At least that's how he framed it. Then suddenly, she was everywhere. Late-night phone calls. Weekend meetups. Conversations that would stop the moment I walked into the room. At first, I told myself it wasn't my place to question it. People reconnect. Old relationships resurface. It happens. But there was something about Rachel that didn't sit right with me. She had a reputation. Not officially, not in a way anyone would openly say, but enough family conversations, enough passing comments to paint a picture. She was always chasing something new. New plans, new opportunities, new ways to start over. None of them ever seemed to last. And Daniel had started to sound like her. He talked differently, more restless, less grounded. Conversations about what else was out there, about not wanting to feel stuck, about needing something more than routine. At the time, I thought he was just going through a phase. Looking back now, I understand that by then, the shift had already happened. What I didn't realize back then was that their reconnection wasn't just emotional. It was logistical, calculated, and slowly, quietly, it was being funded by me. The first time Rachel actually came up in a way that mattered was about 8 months ago. Daniel told me she was going through a difficult situation, needed help, just temporary. I didn't ask too many questions. I've always believed in being reasonable when it comes to people you care about. But temporary has a way of stretching when no one sets boundaries. Their communication became constant. Not casual, not occasional. Constant. I would wake up in the middle of the night and see the glow of his phone screen beside me. His back turned. His voice low, almost careful. If I asked who he was talking to, he wouldn't lie. Rachel. Always Rachel. And always followed by, she just needs someone to talk to. At first, I accepted that. Because at that point, I was still looking at our marriage like a system that just needed adjustment, not something that was already breaking underneath me. What I didn't see yet was how deeply she had already worked her way into the structure of our lives. Not emotionally, financially, strategically. And the truth is, the signs were there. I just didn't recognize them for what they were. Not yet. The first sign wasn't dramatic. There was no sudden disappearance of money, no single transaction large enough to trigger alarm. If anything, it was the opposite. It was subtle, small enough to ignore. One evening, near the end of the month, I sat at the kitchen table going through our checking account like I usually did. It wasn't obsessive, just routine. The same way I check systems at work, making sure everything lined up the way it should. At first, nothing stood out. Mortgage on time. Utilities consistent. Groceries slightly higher than usual, but not enough to question. Then I noticed the transfers. A few $100s here, $600 there. All labeled the same way. Payment app transfers. No notes, no explanation. Individually, they didn't look like a problem. But patterns matter, and when I added them up, it was just under $4,000 over a few months. I waited until Daniel was sitting on the couch, laptop open like usual, before I asked. "Hey," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "These transfers, what are they for?" He didn't hesitate. "Rachel," he said, like it should have been obvious. "She's been having a hard time. I helped her out a few times." A few times. I looked at the numbers again in my head. That's more than a few times, Daniel." His fingers paused on the keyboard, just for a second. Then he leaned back, exhaling like I had already annoyed him. "She needed help," he repeated. "It's not a big deal." "How many times?" I asked. That was the moment his tone changed. Sharp, defensive. "Why does it matter?" "Because it's almost $4,000, I said. "And you didn't mention any of it." He laughed, not because it was funny, because he had already decided my concern wasn't valid. "It's our money, Isabella," he said. "I don't need permission to help someone." I kept my voice steady. Helping someone occasionally is one thing. Quietly sending thousands without even mentioning it is something else. He rolled his eyes, closing the laptop halfway like he was done with the conversation. "You're acting like a bank manager," he said, "not a wife." That line sat there for a second. Not because it hurt, but because it told me something important. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a decision. I didn't argue after that. Not because I agreed with him, but because arguing with Daniel had stopped producing anything useful a long time ago. Instead, I nodded once and let the conversation end. And that was the moment I made a quiet decision. I stopped asking, and I started watching. Over the next few weeks, the pattern became clearer. Transfers happened late at night, usually after one of his longer calls with Rachel. Sometimes early in the morning, right after he spent time on his laptop before leaving for work. The amounts increased, $800, $1,200. Once it was $2,000 in a single transfer. That one I asked about again. Not confrontational, just direct. $2,000, I said. "What was that for?" He didn't even look up this time. "She's trying to secure a place," he said. "Deposit. It's temporary. She'll pay it back." Temporary. That word again. It sounded rehearsed, like he had already practiced the explanation before I asked. I let the silence sit for a moment. "You should have told me," I said finally. He shrugged. "It's not that serious." But it was, and we both knew it. The difference was, I was the only one willing to acknowledge it. After that, I stopped bringing it up entirely. No more questions, no more discussions, just observation. And the more I paid attention, the more I noticed things that didn't quite align. The timing of his messages, the way conversations would stop when I entered the room, the shift in his tone when he talked about the future. Not we, not us, just vague possibilities, options. At first, I told myself they were planning something, maybe helping Rachel get back on her feet, maybe even some kind of business idea. That would have made sense. But the more I listened, the less it sounded like business. There were numbers, yes, but also locations, apartments, move-in dates, deposits, details that didn't fit a temporary situation, details that sounded permanent. Still, I didn't jump to conclusions. Not yet, because suspicion without proof is just noise, and I prefer clarity. What I didn't know at the time was that the clarity I was looking for was already sitting a few feet away from me, on his laptop. Daniel used it every night. Same routine. Dinner, couch, laptop open, phone nearby. Sometimes he said he was handling work emails. Other times he said he was helping Rachel with paperwork. I had never touched it. Not once. It was his. And up until that point, I had never felt the need to go through someone else's things. But once the numbers started adding up, it stopped feeling like privacy and started feeling like concealment. The opportunity came on a Tuesday. He fell asleep on the couch around 10. Laptop still open beside him. That wasn't unusual. What was unusual was the silence. No phone in his hand. No half-finished conversation. Just the quiet hum of the TV and the soft glow of the screen. For a few seconds, I stood there looking at him. At the man I had built 6 years of my life with. At the person who had just told me, without saying it directly, that my concerns didn't matter. I could have woken him up. Told him to go to bed like I always did. Closed the laptop without looking. Pretended I didn't need answers. But something in me had already shifted. Not emotionally, logically. So instead, I walked over, muted the TV, and gently slid the laptop off the couch. He didn't wake up. I carried it into the kitchen, set it down on the table, and for a moment, I just stood there. Because once I opened it, there was no going back to not knowing. No more assumptions. No more benefit of the doubt. Just facts. And facts don't adjust themselves to make you feel better. I sat down, opened the screen fully, and started looking. At first, nothing felt out of place. That was the part that almost made me close the laptop and walk away. His email inbox looked exactly like you'd expect. Appointment confirmations from the clinic, scheduling updates, a few automated reminders. No strange threads. No obvious secrets sitting in plain sight. His browsing history was even more ordinary. Streaming platforms, shopping pages, random articles he probably never finished reading. For a moment, I actually considered the possibility that I had let the situation with the money distort my thinking, that maybe I was reading too much into patterns that didn't mean anything, that maybe I was wrong. But doubt, in my experience, doesn't come from nowhere. It comes from something that doesn't quite fit, even when you can't explain why yet. So I kept going. I opened his documents folder. There were a few spreadsheets, basic budgeting, nothing unusual. A couple of files that looked like Rachel had sent him to review. Some notes that didn't stand out. Then I saw it. A folder labeled New Start. It wasn't hidden. It wasn't locked. It just sat there, like it belonged. That was the first moment something in my chest tightened. Because people don't name folders like that for temporary situations. They name them like that when they're planning something permanent. I clicked on it. There were about a dozen files inside. The first one I opened was a spreadsheet. And that was the moment everything shifted. It wasn't vague. It wasn't speculative. It was precise. Columns of numbers, monthly expenses, rent projections, utility estimates, furniture budgets, transportation costs, even a section labeled Emergency Buffer 6 months. At the top of the sheet, under Household Occupants, there were 2 names. Daniel Hayes, Rachel Hayes. My name wasn't there. Not anywhere. I stared at it for a few seconds longer than I needed to. Not because I didn't understand what I was looking at, but because part of me was still catching up to it. Every funding entry listed the same source. Transfers from joint account. Transfers from Isabella's salary deposit, over and over again. I scrolled down slowly. There was a line that appeared multiple times in the notes column. Rachel contribution later. Later, not now. Which meant something very simple. She wasn't funding any of this. I opened the next file. A lease estimate. 1-bedroom apartment. Newer complex, across town. Move-in date, 5 weeks away. 5 weeks. Not hypothetical. Scheduled. The next document was a checklist. Title, relocation steps, set up utilities, change mailing address, secure moving truck, transfer remaining funds. Each item had a checkbox next to it, some already marked as complete. The level of organization stopped me for a second, because Daniel had never been organized. Bills used to sit on the counter for days. Laundry piled up. Groceries were always last minute. But this was meticulous, structured, deliberate. I opened another file, then another, each one filling in pieces of the same picture. Timeline projections, expense tracking, a record of every transfer he had already made. I stopped on that one, scrolled to the bottom. Total transferred, $10,842. For a moment, I just stared at the number, not reacting, not processing emotionally, just registering it. Because numbers don't lie. And that number told me everything I needed to know about how long this had been happening, how intentional it was, how far along the plan already was. But the document that mattered most was the last one. It wasn't a spreadsheet. It wasn't formatted. Just a plain text file. I opened it and read. It was written like notes, like someone summarizing a plan to make sure nothing was missed. Rachel secures apartment first. Continue transfers quietly. Finalize move once funds complete. Leave during Isabella's work hours. Avoid confrontation. That line sat there on the screen. Simple, direct, cold. Avoid confrontation. I read it again. Then the next line. She won't react quickly if I'm already gone. That was the moment something inside me went completely still. Not angry. Not hurt. Clear. Because that sentence told me something more important than anything else in that folder. This wasn't confusion. This wasn't emotional drift. This was a decision. Planned. Documented. Scheduled. I closed the file, then reopened it, just to make sure I hadn't misread it. I hadn't. For about 20 minutes, I went through everything again. Not because I needed confirmation, but because I wanted precision. Every detail. every number, every timeline. Because once you understand the full structure of something, you can control how it ends. When I finally closed the laptop, the house was completely quiet. The TV still muted. Daniel still asleep on the couch, exactly where I had left him. I carried the laptop back, set it down in the same position, screen angled the same way. Nothing disturbed. Then I stood there for a moment, looking at him, trying to match the person in front of me with the plan I had just read. It didn't align, not because the evidence wasn't real, but because people rarely look like the version of themselves they are when no one is watching. I didn't wake him, didn't confront him, didn't ask a single question, because confrontation, at that point, would have done one thing: warned him. And I wasn't interested in warning him. On my terms. I turned off the lights, went to bed. And the next morning, I treated everything like it was normal. Same routine, same timing, same silence. He left for the clinic around 8. Didn't look at me twice before walking out the door. That had become normal too. But the second his car pulled out of the driveway, everything changed. The second Daniel's car disappeared at the end of the street, I didn't hesitate. There's a difference between reacting emotionally and acting with intent. By that point, I wasn't reacting anymore. I was executing. The first call I made was to the bank. I didn't raise concerns. I didn't accuse anyone. I simply explained that I wanted to review the access settings on our joint account. The representative walked me through the options: transaction alerts, transfer limits, external payment authorizations. Settings I had never bothered with before. Within 20 minutes, everything changed. Every transaction would now trigger a notification. Transfer limits were reduced. External payment permissions were restricted. Daniel could still use the account like normal. Groceries, gas, daily expenses. But moving large amounts of money? That was no longer going to be easy. The second step was even simpler. I opened a new personal account. Up until that moment, my salary had always gone directly into the joint account. That was the foundation their entire plan relied on. That morning, I redirected it. From now on, the money would come to me first. Then I would decide what moved into the shared account, not the other way around. The third step required a little more patience. I drove to an electronics store and bought a small external hard drive. When I got back home, I opened Daniel's laptop again. Same folder. New start? This time I didn't just read. I copied everything. Every spreadsheet. Every document. Every note. Every version of the plan they thought only existed between them. Because if Daniel ever tried to change the story later, I wanted the truth preserved exactly as it was. By the time I finished, the sun was already starting to drop. And as far as Daniel knew, everything was still exactly the same. That was the most important part. The next 2 weeks, I didn't change my behavior at all. Same routine, same tone, same conversations. If he noticed anything, he didn't show it. Which meant one thing: he had no idea. And because he had no idea, he kept moving forward. The alerts I set up made everything visible. Every attempt, every transfer, every pattern. About every 4 or 5 days, he tried again. 500, 800. Once another attempt at 2,000. Each time, my phone buzzed within seconds. And because of the limits I had put in place, most of the larger transfers failed. The first time it happened, he mentioned it casually over dinner. "Hey," he said, barely looking up from his plate. "The bank must have updated something. A transfer didn't go through earlier." I shrugged. "It happens sometimes." He rolled his eyes. "Yeah, it's annoying." Annoying. That's what it was to him. A minor inconvenience, not a system shutting down, not a plan collapsing piece by piece. Just annoying. By the third failed transfer, his behavior started to shift. Subtle at first. More impatient. More irritable. One night, he snapped at me over something as simple as dinner. "What do you want?" I had asked. "I don't know, Isabella. Why does everything have to be a discussion?" I didn't respond. Because it wasn't about dinner. It was about control. And he could feel it slipping, without understanding why. During that time, I kept going back to the documents, reviewing them, not emotionally, strategically. One detail stood out more than anything else. The plan depended on the apartment. Rachel was supposed to secure it first. Everything else came after. Which meant, if the apartment didn't happen, nothing else would. About 10 days after I found the folder, I saw the confirmation. Another night. Another open laptop. Another opportunity. There was a new file, a scanned rental application. Rachel's name listed as the primary tenant. Daniel listed as the second occupant. Move-in date, 5 weeks away. 5 weeks. That was the timeline they were working with. That was how long Daniel thought he had before disappearing. I sat there for a moment looking at the screen. Then I closed the laptop. Because at that point, I didn't need more information. I needed action. The next morning, I took the day off work. Daniel left at 8 like usual. Didn't ask questions. Didn't notice anything different. And the moment he was gone, I started the next step. I went back through the documents I had copied, found the apartment complex name, the leasing office number. Then I called. I didn't introduce myself as a wife. Didn't accuse anyone. Didn't make it emotional. I kept it simple. Professional. I'm calling to verify some financial details connected to a rental application, I said. That was enough to get their attention. Once I explained that the funds listed were coming from a joint account tied to my name and that I was reviewing unauthorized transfers, the tone of the conversation changed immediately. Careful, measured, cautious. I didn't ask them to cancel anything. I didn't need to. I just made one thing very clear. Any lease involving those funds could become part of a financial dispute. That was enough. The agent told me she would flag the application for review, which meant delay, which meant uncertainty, which meant the one piece their entire plan depended on was no longer secure. After that, I drove home and started packing, not angrily, not destructively, methodically. Daniel's clothes, his shoes, his personal items, everything that belonged to him, but wasn't essential to the structure of the house. I didn't throw anything away, didn't damage anything. I just removed it from the space, box by box, room by room. By the time I was done, the house looked different, cleaner, quieter, like something had already ended, even before it was officially over. I moved everything into the garage, stacked neatly, visible, deliberate. By the time his car pulled into the driveway that evening, everything was already in place. The plan he had spent months building was about to collapse in a single moment. I heard his car before I saw him. The familiar sound of the engine pulling into the driveway, the slight pause before the door opened. Footsteps approaching like any other evening. Routine. Predictable. That word he hated so much. The front door opened. Closed. Silence followed. Not the comfortable kind. The kind that comes when something doesn't look the way it's supposed to. I stayed where I was, standing near the kitchen, hands resting lightly on the counter, posture calm, controlled. He stepped into the living room and stopped. I didn't need to see his face to know exactly what he was looking at. The empty shelves, the cleared surfaces, the absence of his things. Then a few seconds later, the shift. His gaze moving toward the garage, the stacked boxes visible through the small window. That was when he spoke. What the hell is this? His voice wasn't confused. It was sharp, defensive, already leaning toward anger. I didn't raise mine. It's everything you'll need, I said evenly, since you were planning to leave anyway. There was a pause, just long enough for the words to land. Then he turned toward me. What are you talking about? I met his eyes. Steady, unmoved. Your plan with Rachel, I said, it's finished. For a second, something flickered across his face. Not shock. Recognition. Like someone realizing a situation had shifted, faster than they expected. You went through my laptop, he asked. Not denial, not explanation. Just that. I nodded once. Yes. His jaw tightened. That's private, Isabella. That word, private. I let it sit there for a second before responding. You lost the right to privacy the moment you started using my income to fund a second life, I said. His expression hardened. That's not what this is. It is exactly what it is, I replied. The spreadsheet, the lease, the relocation checklist, the note you wrote about leaving while I was at work. I watched the moment it registered. Not all at once, but piece by piece. Each detail closing off another path for denial. You don't understand, he started. I understand everything, I cut in, still calm. More than you think. He ran a hand through his hair, pacing once across the room. This was the part where he tried to regain control. I could see it. The shift from being caught to trying to reshape the narrative. It wasn't like that, he said. Rachel just needed help. We were looking at options. Options, I repeated quietly. You listed her as your primary household partner. He didn't answer, because there wasn't one. I stepped away from the counter, walking to the kitchen table, picked up the external hard drive, set it down in front of him. A soft, deliberate sound. I have copies of everything, I said. Every file, every transfer, every version of your plan. He stared at it, then back at me, and that was the moment his confidence started to break. Not dramatically, not loudly, just a subtle collapse. Isabella, he said, softer now, you're overreacting. I almost smiled at that, not because it was funny, because it was predictable. No, I said, I'm responding. Silence stretched between us. Heavy, unavoidable. Then I continued. The transfers are blocked, I said. Your access is limited. My salary doesn't go into that account anymore. His head snapped up slightly. And the apartment, he asked? That was the one he cared about. The one detail that mattered. It's under review, I said. I spoke to the leasing office. That was it. That was the moment everything connected for him. The failed transfers, the delays, the tension he couldn't explain. It wasn't random. It wasn't bad luck. It was me. Are you serious? He asked. I held his gaze. Yes. For a second, he just stood there, like he was recalculating, trying to figure out where the plan had gone wrong, trying to find something, anything, he could still control. There was nothing left. So what now? He asked finally. I gestured toward the garage. Now you leave. His expression shifted again. Anger, frustration, something sharper underneath. You're just kicking me out, he said. No, I replied calmly. I'm removing you from a situation you were already planning to leave. That's not fair. Fair? I let that word sit there for a second, then shook my head slightly. You built an exit plan behind my back, I said. You don't get to negotiate fairness now. He opened his mouth to argue again, closed it, because this time he knew it wouldn't work. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he looked toward the garage again, at the boxes, at the physical proof that this wasn't a conversation anymore. It was an outcome. What am I supposed to do? He asked. It wasn't defensive this time. It was something else. Uncertainty. I didn't soften. Rachel seems very involved in your future, I said. You should ask her. That landed harder than anything else I had said, because it forced the reality of the situation into something immediate. Not a plan, not a possibility. Yeah. Here, he exhaled slowly, ran a hand across the back of his neck, then walked past me, toward the garage. I didn't follow. I stayed where I was, listening to the sound of boxes shifting, car doors opening, closing, trips back and forth. No yelling, no dramatic confrontation, just movement. About an hour later, the front door opened again. He stepped inside briefly, looked at me, like he wanted to say something, an apology, an explanation, something that would change the way this ended. But there was nothing left to say. So he didn't. He turned, walked out. And a few seconds later, I heard the car pull away. No goodbye, no closure, just the absence of him. The first thing I did was simple. I blocked his number, then Rachel's. Then I went through every account, every service, every shared access point, and removed him completely. The house felt different that night. Not empty. Clear, like something unresolved had finally been cut cleanly instead of dragging on. Over the next few weeks, he sent a few emails from different addresses, asking to come back, to talk, to collect the rest of his things. I allowed it once. He came while I was home, took what was left. Didn't say much. Neither did I. After that, I contacted a lawyer, filed for divorce. The process was straightforward. No children. Clear financial records, and documentation that showed exactly where the missing money had gone. A few months later, it was done. Finalized. Clean. Looking back now, the strangest part isn't what he did. It's how confident he was that it would work, that he could quietly build a new life using my resources, and I wouldn't see it coming, that I would be confused, slow to react, too structured to notice something breaking outside the system. But the truth is, systems don't fail all at once. They show signs, patterns, inconsistencies. And once you see them clearly, you don't react emotionally. You shut them down completely. The house is quieter now, simpler,